Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with my second presentation explaining why Mao instigated the 100 Flowers campaign in China in 1956 and into 1957. Now, having looked at the economic reasons, this presentation will turn our focus to political reasons. The bombshell that was dropped by Nikita Khrushchev in his so-called secret speech, which criticised Stalinism and which wasn't very secret, and Mao's concerns about his control over the Chinese Communist Party. Nikita Khrushchev dropped a bombshell with his secret speech denouncing Stalin's crimes against the party, which was made in the closed final session of the 20th Congress of the Soviet Union's Communist Party in February 1956. A speech that had repercussions far beyond its intended purpose. It created problems for communists around the world, communists in and out of power. Mao and the CCP had for decades been singing the praises of Stalin. Never mind what Mao might have really thought. The saviour of all the oppressed, Mao said on Stalin's 60th birthday. The teacher and friend of mankind and of the Chinese people, Mao said on his 70th birthday. The greatest genius of the present age, Mao on Stalin's death. How then was he going to explain Khrushchev's criticisms, which, though the full text of the speech was kept from the Chinese people, its main points began to filter down quite quickly through the different party levels and to the public. If socialism was a high level of development, a higher level of development than capitalism, how was the party to explain that the Soviet model of socialism, which they had copied, could allow Stalin to place himself above the party? The charge that Stalin had used a cult of personality to position himself above the party struck Mao as an attack on him too. And the CCP response that such cults were the poisonous ideological survivals of the old society did not ease Mao's concerns. This leads some historians to interpret Mao's call in April 1956 to let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend, a call for suggestions and criticisms, as an attempt to portray himself as distinctly more liberal compared to Stalin. Was to avoid the mistakes of Stalin and the leaders in the Eastern Bloc, enable the party to get closer to the people and hear their concerns, the real reason behind the 100 Flowers campaign. Or, given the fallout from Khrushchev's speech, far from being seen as more liberal than Stalin, did Mao change his mind and use the campaign to encourage criticism and different schools of thought, only in order to crush those who voiced them and maintain his firm control of how socialism in China would develop? Khrushchev's speech had raised hopes in Eastern Europe that a more liberal period was dawning and led to popular reform movements in countries across the Eastern European bloc, notably the revolt in Poland in June 1956 and the bigger revolt in Hungary in October the same year. This appalled Mao, and he criticised Khrushchev for losing control, leading some historians to offer this different interpretation of what the 100 Flowers movement would eventually unleash. Or was it control over the CCP that was uppermost in Mao's mind? Though this was still linked to the economic direction and the pace of socialisation the party should take. A fierce debate was still raging in the party about the direction the second 5-year plan should take. The majority within the party was still committed to the orthodox Soviet strategy, priority to heavy industry, necessitating a scientific and technological intelligentsia, continuing urbanization, all before turning any significant focus on agriculture. Mao was still facing criticism for collectivizing agriculture before industry was in a position to provide the technology to make it worthwhile. Mao, however, felt such a policy would only lead to an expansion of the bureaucracy and a professional as well as bureaucratic elite alienated from the masses, which would be an ideological own goal. It would also further the gap between town and countryside. Mao wanted to move radically from the heavily bureaucratic Soviet model. He offered a radical alternative. Heavy industry would continue to be developed with no slackening of pace, but more investment should be afforded light industry and agriculture. The more backward inland regions should be developed, and instead of large-scale plants, the emphasis should be on medium and small plants placed in the countryside, with labour-intensive projects prioritised ahead of capital-intensive ones. As far as possible, control should be in the hands of local communities, who would be relatively autonomous. Mao was certainly not happy with the CCP's response when at the 8th Party Congress held in September 1956, so with the 100 Flowers campaign underway, the post of General Secretary, which had been abolished in 1937, was resurrected, and Deng Xiaoping was given the position, giving him considerable control over the party's organisational structure. And Pang Da-wei, his proposal to admit the standard reference to Mao's thought as the inspiration of party and nation, was carried. He felt that Deng and Pang and other leaders, notably Liu Shaoqi and Zhou Enlai, were becoming too assertive, and that his undisputed authority was being questioned, even openly challenged. His humour wasn't helped when by the end of the year the party was talking of poisonous weeds growing amongst his flowers. Mao had been thinking of stepping down, withdrawing to what he called the Second Front, a strategic role with Liu and others in charge of day-to-day matters, gaining experience while he was still there to guide them. For now, however, he only withdrew into one of his customary sulks. "I am alone with the people," he would lament, returning to the fray in February 1957, when he picked up his call for different ideas to be voiced, this time saying, "Marxism is a scientific truth and fears no criticism. Marxists should not be afraid of being criticised by anyone." Though, in the same speech, he also pointed to the need to eliminate counter-revolutionaries. But Mao was still being frustrated by the party, who, fearing unrest that might be difficult to control, were reluctant to back the campaign. However, Mao had an answer to that. He would bypass the party and appeal to the people. But that's for another presentation. Now, before I go, let me ask you to please give a thumbs up if you have found this presentation useful, and to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and to please tell your friends about it too. Do please spread the word for me. But for now, it only remains for me to thank you, as I hope I always do, for listening, and to wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.